Hello and welcome to our conversation on costing. In this session, we will try to understand the term cost. First, a question that we'd like to address is why is cost information needed? So, cost information is needed for statutory purposes and for managerial decision making. For statutory purposes, it has to be shown in the balance sheet the cost of the inventory, and the cost of inventory, while showing on the balance sheet, we are bound to follow the accounting standard, and the relevant accounting standard is AS2 or Ind AS 2, which very clearly says that inventory to be valued at the cost or the net realizable value, whichever is lower. So for the purpose of financial accounting, cost information is required for cost to show the value of inventory, and to determine the value of inventory, we are required to follow the Ind AS 2 or AS2. But for the purpose of managerial decision making, it is not necessary that we have to follow the AS2 or Ind AS2. The purpose for which the cost is required to be determined will tell us about the method in which the cost to be computed. So the managerial decision may be for the purpose of pricing, may be for the purpose of make or buy decisions, may be for decisions regarding closing or continuing an operation, or any other relevant decisions like are all products profitable or are all customers equally profitable. To answer these questions, we need to find cost. And this information is not for just the shareholder, but this is an information for the management. So therefore, it is not necessary to strictly follow the AS2 or Ind AS2. There is a managerial discretion. The options are there, choices are there. For example, for pricing, the way we will try to see pricing, it is as a process of cost recovery. Which cost to be recovered? What cost to be recovered? At what point to be recovered is a managerial decision. Unless, of course, the price is about a regulated product like power. So therefore, in a costing course, we are more governed by the managerial needs rather than the statutory requirements for the purpose of reporting the value of inventory on the balance sheet. So, but what is this cost? Cost is an expenses incurred, actual or notional, for producing and selling a product or service. So when we say actual, it involves the actual outflow of cash, whereas notional, which does not involve the outflow of cash. In economics, that notional cost is called opportunity cost. We'll develop the term opportunity cost in one of our subsequent presentations. But whatever is a cost, to understand the composition of this cost, we can present the cost and calculate the cost in n number of ways. So the which method is required for determination of cost to a large extent depends on the purpose for which you determine the cost. So let me take you through some of the different ways of calculating the cost. The easiest one, which may not be very useful or relevant, we can say that cost is a summation of expenses. Pull all the expenses together, sum them up, you get the cost, divided by number of units produced, you'll get cost per unit. But that's not very useful. So therefore, there is a need to understand the composition of the cost and classify these expenses. And one of the very popular methods of classification is when you classify the expenses into material cost, labor cost, and other expenses. So total cost is equal to material cost, labor cost, and other expenses. And we'll take an example to explain all these 5 or 6 different ways of calculating cost. But we also know, because of the direct and indirect relationship, some of these expenses are directly identified with a product or services, and some are not. So therefore, the material, labor, and expenses can be further classified into direct and indirect. If we use the direct and indirect classification and put that in determining the total cost, then the total cost will be direct material plus direct labor plus direct expenses. These are the expenses which are directly identified with a product or a service. And indirect material plus indirect labor plus indirect expenses, these are not directly identified, and individually they may be not very significant part of the total cost. So therefore total cost can also be presented as TM, DL plus DE plus indirect material, indirect labor, and indirect expenses. And this indirect material, indirect labor, and indirect expenses together are called overheads. Direct material, direct labor, and direct expenses are called prime cost. So total cost can also be presented as PC, prime cost, plus the overheads. Now let us take one step forward. Where are these overheads incurred? These overheads may be incurred in the factory, maybe in the admin offices, or maybe at the place of selling and distribution locations. So therefore, overheads can be classified into manufacturing overheads, administration overhead, and selling and distribution overhead. If we use this classification, then we can present the total cost as prime cost plus MO, manufacturing overhead, plus AO, admin overhead, plus SDO, sales and distribution overhead. So you are able to see in all these cases we are finding the total cost, but the way we find differs, and that selection, the choice of the method, completely and fully depends on the managerial needs. Now the same PC plus MO plus AO plus SDO can also be presented as direct material plus conversion cost plus admin overhead and SDO. So what is this conversion cost? The conversion cost is a direct labor, direct expenses, and manufacturing overhead. That means the conversion cost, as the name itself suggests, is the expenses required to convert the direct material into finished product. So direct cost plus indirect cost is the total cost. But the indirect cost, which is also called overheads, can be incurred at different places. So there is a need for us to know where are these expenses incurred. So if you just put all the expenses together and calculate cost, then that information is not useful. So from the managerial requirements point of view, we would like to know what percentage of the total cost is prime cost. What percentage of the total cost is a manufacturing overhead? what percentage of the total cost is non-manufacturing overhead, and non-manufacturing overheads is admin and sales, because it is necessary to understand the composition of the cost if you want to take decisions, if you want to control, or if you want to reduce the cost. So this is one of the ways, the cost can be understood, is to classify the cost based on the nature of the expenses. And the nature of the expenses will tell us the composition of the overheads, composition of the expenses, which will help us in understanding the cost better. But you should also be careful in costing classes. Some of the expenses are not recognized at all while computing the cost. And those costs are interest. Okay? Those costs are interest, the income from other sources, gains and losses from fluctuations of currency or fluctuations of the market. These are called financial expenses. These are non-operating incomes. These are non-cash incomes and expenses. So therefore, the financing charges and non-operating incomes and expenses normally not included in the cost. So in order to understand the cost for the purpose of managerial decisions, therefore, it is necessary to understand different ways of presenting the cost. Thank you very much.